Already passed the transportation budget. The operating budget for the last biennium was about $86 billion, and that's a general revenue fund, so a fund from all of our collective income tax, sales tax, and the transportation budget is made up of the motor fuel tax, along with a little bit from the turnpike and license fees and vehicle registration fees, and that one's about $14 billion. And this is the last biennium, so I would expect the current budgets to be just a little bit higher than these. Generally, they're capped at about 3.5% growth rate. They do reset about every 4 years, though, so that it isn't continual growth. But I do expect them to be just a little bit higher than these numbers right here. So we did pass the transportation budget out of the House. That has to be passed out by March 31st. And then the general operating budget, which we're working on right now, has to be passed out by June 30th. It has to be fully passed by June 30th. So we'll pass it out of the House, which is my chamber, probably in the next 2 weeks. So, and we'll get into kind of those budgets a little bit more in detail. The Workers' Comp and Industrial Commission, those are both essentially workers' comp budgets. Those are paid for by, they're non-GRF revenue, so employers, public and private, pay premiums into those. And then the capital budget, which is done on the first 6 months of the even years, and that is $3.5 billion for the last biennium, and that those funds go to infrastructure. So that's kind of, those are the dollars that we end up fighting for to bring back to our counties to fund local infrastructure. And the last biennium, you guys might remember Lorain County Fairgrounds got several $1 million in the capital budget. So the general revenue fund, this is by revenue source, so, and again, last biennium, so this will look a little different, but the majority of that revenue is from sales tax, so about half. And then a little over a quarter, or about 35%, is income tax, and then the CAT tax, and then the 2.5 or 2.3 billion is from excise taxes like tobacco, alcohol, gambling, things like that. So just a really small portion, though. GRF by revenue source, so again, a little over 35% is from income tax, and the state has decreased. It's been on a long trajectory of decreasing the income tax. I don't know if you guys remember what your income tax used to be for the state income tax, but it is significantly smaller now than it was previously, but that's also why your property taxes are higher, and I'm sure the folks here are here today to talk about that as well. But I think that legislators did a bad job historically of telling you they were decreasing your income tax. They probably should have highlighted that a little bit more now that we have such high unjustifiable property taxes. But I think the goal there was, if the state's not taxing you, they don't really have some more power over you, essentially. So they want the locals to decide at the local level how you want to spend your money, and you're going to see that in the form of levies. So you do have that that control at the local level to vote no or yes on those levies. And I think a lot of people will be more acutely aware of those levies as we're going forward, since we've seen the property tax increase. So these are your personal income tax brackets back starting in 2004. You can see there were several then. We're down to really essentially 2 since the first one's 0. So these are your current income tax brackets. So very low, especially compared to other states. We are significantly lower. We're not 0, of course, but there is a push to decrease it to a 2.75% flat income tax, or with a goal of 0. But you can see, from making 34% of the state budget up, I mean, that's going to be difficult without significant cutting. So we would need to come up with 34% of the budget if we're going to decrease or eliminate the state income tax. So the expenditures, so this is your overall state GRF, and this is not including the federal funding that we get. So you can see that these numbers in this pie chart don't equal the 86 or $100 billion that we're about to see in the state operating budget from the general revenue fund, because this is only showing just the state GRF funds, not the federal dollars that are coming in, which end up making that $90 or $100 billion budget. So if you're just looking at state expenditures, we spend the most on K through 12 and higher education. So $15.4 billion, and that's just the state share of instruction. That is not the local property tax. So that's in addition to this $15.4 billion that we spend on education. About a quarter of it again is this is a state share. That's for Medicaid. And then with the federal share, Medicaid actually is the biggest expenditure for the state. So it's 51% of the state budget. But just the state share, higher ed takes that. So corrections then it's a small portion, but still significant. So really we say our state educates, medicates, and incarcerates. That's what we do with all of your money. So that other little section, that's all the rest of the things, your nonprofits, your earmarks for things. And some of those, I mean, I'm learning, some of them are very worthy causes. Others, we're certainly looking at doging. So we have what's called the Doge Caucus. We just created that in the last couple of weeks. So you will definitely see some doging. I don't know how much of that will show up in the state operating budget as as a policy or an amendment, but definitely over the next 1 to 2 years, you're going to see that doging. But even if we doge, right, that's only that little sliver, that 3.2 billion. So I mean, we still have to work on education, we still have to work on Medicaid, and we still have to work on corrections as well. So there's an argument to be made that there's still not enough money for any of those entities, right? But how much is enough, right? How much is enough? Lorain County just got $34 billion extra from property tax income, and yet we still hear from the schools that's still not enough. So I guess my question is, how much is enough? Is there ever enough? And I don't know that answer. So more total GRF expenditures for the past biennium, and this is with those federal dollars, just a good way for you to conceptualize it. That's where you see that Medicaid is the highest portion of the state expenditure. So, and we're certainly looking at that currently too. But really, some of that's going to depend on what the feds do. So we're kind of waiting, to see. We're still going to go on with our budget. And I'm not on Medicaid committee, but there are certainly they're certainly looking to see if they can make any cuts in Medicaid as well. So there's something called SAL, or state appropriations limitations, and in the Ohio Revised Code that limits the growth of the GRF appropriations to 3.5% or inflation plus population growth, whichever is greater. That unused growth rolls over and can be used the following year, but the base does reset every 4 years, so that's good. So the state appropriation limits can be suspended due to an emergency or a 2/3 vote of each chamber. There is something called this Budget Stabilization Fund, or the Rainy Day Fund, and that's limited to 10% of the prior year's GRF. The current balance of that fund is $3.8 billion, and that's to stabilize. So really, that just makes up for budget shortfalls if we see it. And I looked at the past 20 years. It's been used 3 times, and it's been emptied twice. And those 3 times were early 2000s. 2007 to 9 during recessions, and then it wasn't emptied, but it was used a little bit at the beginning of COVID before federal dollars started flowing in with the CARES Act and the ARPA funds. So we did get federal COVID money. That money's gone, but because we all of a sudden got a bunch of federal money, though we did have a one-time GRF surplus in the state budget, and that is also gone. That is required to be utilized by the end of 2024. So that money's gone, the COVID money's gone, and also the state revenue is declining currently. So this budget, compared to the last budget, is definitely much more modest, if you will. So perfect time for the doging. So the surplus that I mentioned, these are some of the areas that surplus went to. A lot of money there. Ohio did an expanded sales tax holiday. This was all before I was in the legislature. So they did an expanded sales tax holiday. They did one-time strategic capital improvements. Some of those did come back to Lorain County. There's an All Ohio Future Fund, a Connect for Ohio. Those were some housing initiatives. Brownfield remediation, H2 Ohio, which it tries to improve water quality from the runoff from agriculture. They did some building demolition. $150 million went into the Budget Stabilization Fund. They did an innovation hub. They improved rail safety crossings, and a program called Welcome Ohio. Now, those all will not continue. Some of them will, where we can find funding, but a lot of those will not continue. They were just from the surplus one-time fund. So what to expect for the state operating budget? The governor is the one who initiates the initial proposed operating budget, and it comes out in what's called a blue book. we introduced that as a bill, currently House Bill 96. We have hearings on that, which we've been doing the past 6 weeks. We all tried where we can to amend the budget. We can either amend to bring appropriations back to the district, or we can amend to reduce the size of government. And I would say there's a healthy combination of both of those happening right now. The 17 new Republicans in the House have a big appetite to reduce and amend the budget lower. So all those amendments, then we introduce a sub-bill, a substitute bill, and that becomes what's called an omnibus bill, which includes all of the amendments, either up or down for appropriations. That goes to the floor of the House, and this is April, but we may actually pass that out in the third week of March, or the last week of March. Then the bill goes to the Senate, and the Senate goes through the exact same process as the House. They can take out things that we put in the budget, or they can add things that we didn't put in the budget, and then we all meet together in a conference committee, and we kind of negotiate those changes up or down. So either add them back in if they took them out, or if they added something in, we can propose to take it out. Then it goes to the governor, and he can line item veto certain items of the budget as well. So. And we can talk about certain line items of the budget if anybody has a particular interest, library funds, local government funds, anything like that. But I didn't put all of that in here just for the sake of kind of time. But we did just pass the transportation budget out of the House. That's going to the Senate. And that is 35% of the motor fuel tax comes back locally here. It's administered by the Ohio Department of Transportation and Public Works Programs, plus the Transportation Review and Advisory Committee. And there are no earmarks in the transportation budget. There are earmarks in the operating budget. And again, we're kind of seeing where we can doge those, or what's worth kind of bringing back to the district. So what questions do you guys have about the state budget, if any?
Yeah, we'll get the mic here.
I have to go after this. We have plenty of time for questions, but I'm also going to present on property taxes after this in Huron County, so I'm really sorry that I can't see the presentation today on the property taxes, but I want to let everybody know the property taxes don't come back to the state, those are all local. So I mean, we're not at the state, we're not spending any of the property taxes, so that's all local. So the state is just income sales and excise taxes.
Okay, yeah, so we're gonna have some questions, Jeff's gonna take it around, but I have a first question.
Sure.
At some point in the future, there may be the elimination of the Department of Education.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't mean every education dollar goes away, but most of it will. Is the state of Ohio ready to pick up the slack?
You're talking federal, or?
Yeah, when the federal, I presume school districts will lose federal funding for special ed specifically. I mean, that's what I hear. Special ed is definitely something that is federally funded. When the Department of Education goes away, we're going to pretend that that money goes away. Mm-hmm. And then every district is going to complain and need to figure it out. And maybe that's a district question, but they will also be looking at the state saying, is it a state question? So I guess just what are your general thoughts on all of a sudden having no federal money for education?
I mean, that would be huge. I mean, you know, if we go back to let's go back to that slide, and so I'm just guessing the federal share is, I mean, we're talking a $90 billion budget. So if half of that is Medicaid, 45, or it's 51%, so $45 million, we'll say, just rounding. Another, we'll say half of that is going to education. So we're probably getting at least $15 billion from the federal government. So there's no way Ohio's coming up with $15 billion. I mean, these are your funds?
Okay.
Not possible. So I think, yeah, I mean, I can't see where we would come up. I mean, you saw our state budget, or rainy day fund, state stabilization fund. That's got $3.8 billion. I am, by the way, I'm encouraged to use that fund almost every week when I meet with a constituent. They say, you should take all of that money and give it to education right now. I think that's a terrible idea. We should not use that for anything other than what it's intended, which are budget shortfalls that come into the state. But just so you know, that's being proposed. So that would only be $3.8 billion, though. We need $15 billion to make up for that. So I can't see, though, that they would cut off all funding to the state, but anything's possible in this environment.
I saw that you had something up there, I think it said, "Come Home, Ohio."
Yes.
What is that about?
That was to increase, I'm trying to find that slide here. Welcome home, yep. That was for land grants, for land banks, and to remediate rehab construction projects. And again, I kind of am getting this sense just by, observing. I mean, I've only been there a couple of months, but they had to use this money and they were just looking for the best uses for it. They had a deadline they had to use the money by. So, these are the things that were proposed, and all these things were proposed in the last operating budget, which was House Bill 33 2 years ago. So that's where all these appropriations were appropriated. And I actually believe that was John Husted's amendment into the budget.
I live in Vermillion. I'm Ray Asik. Our property taxes, everybody's gone up, 50%, whatever. And yet I read in Vermillion, we're talking about a $6 to $7 million increase or overflow of extra money. There's just a lot of extra money floating around, and then, like you mentioned, they're looking for levies. So right now I'm anti-levy. I don't care what it is, because they have so much money. I can't trust the government, let's put it that way.
So I'm assuming you mean all government, but I would just encourage you to kind of parse out your governments and hold each one accountable where they should be. I get a lot of calls in my office about the property taxes, and they think it's all within our purview. Property taxes are mostly within your purview locally. So I would encourage you to hold each respective government office accountable for their portion, right? That would require understanding of which portion goes where, but that's really what I've spent the most of my time on since I've been in office, are educating those people who are calling in as to who's responsible for what. So at the state level, the only thing we can do for property taxes is targeting unvoted millage, right? So certainly we can cap a rate, that it can increase to inflation or all kinds of fancy things. We can increase homestead, which the state would just pay for. I mean, the homestead right now, the state pays $2 billion for. So if that goes up, we'll have to come up with more money. If we doubled the homestead, we'd have to come up with $4 billion to pay back local government. But really only about half of property tax problem can be fixed at the state level. The other half it has to be fixed at the local level. So, the levy system is broken. We're looking at fixing that, but also, when you're voting for levies, make sure you just keep that in mind, that half of the property taxes are voted on at the local level. So, and what are they doing with those dollars locally? So we're not spending the property tax at the state level, that's being spent at the local level. So I would encourage you to ask where that money's going. I want to remind everybody that those increases in property tax, they did not have to be taken by the local governments. And there are counties that did not take the money. That money was not budgeted for by any school district, county, or city. So that process is called the Budget Commission, which is made up by some local officials. To be fair, they weren't clear. It's not very clear in the revised code what authority they have locally to take or not take that money. Only a couple counties did not take the money. So it was not very clear. So currently there is a bill to make that very clear what the Budget Commission authority is, that they do not have to take that money. But nobody budgeted for that money. So I just would encourage you to ask your schools, what did you do with that money? And how are you justifiably coming back and asking for increased levies when you just got an extra $4.5 million that you didn't budget for? So just hold your respective governments accountable for their individual portions that they're responsible for.
Kelly, the Ohio Supreme Court has ruled that the school funding measures are unconstitutional, and it's been that way for some years. Is the legislature any closer in trying to correct the funding for schools? And since in Ohio we have like 6 different school districts, and you're thinking about this DOJ and other efficiencies, wouldn't it be more appropriate to comprehensively reform education, school districts, along with a new funding formula? And if so, how would you see that proceeding?
So that was back in 1997 that it was deemed unconstitutional, and it actually has been rectified. In 2020, with the Fair School Funding Act, which was part of the operating budget, that's where that passed. That was a 6-year plan to, quote, fully fund schools in a constitutional manner. It has not been deemed unconstitutional to date. So the presumption is that it is constitutional currently. However, we are in the last 2 years of fully funding the Fair School Funding Act, and what we're seeing in the governor's current budget is that we're essentially not going to fully fund schools according to that. So there's about 50% of people are going to argue for fair school funding and 50% are going to argue against. This is just the state share though of instruction, not the local funding. That's property tax. So I mean the state is decreasing the share that's going to go to schools currently. I predict that will decrease further yet based on the property tax reform that you're going to see, because it is going to target what's called the 20 mil floor, which is currently guaranteed to school districts, and we can change that at the state level. And that, I mean, there are 25 House bills right now to address property tax reform. That's not even counting the bills in the Senate. So one of them does address levies. Currently, not all levies count towards the 20 mil floor. That's one problem. They all should. When you don't meet, when your local levies don't meet the 20 mil floor, the state requires the local government to change the formula to make up for those funds. Okay, so if all levies counted towards the 20 mil floor, then your property taxes would decrease. Does that make sense? So back to the fair school funding. I don't believe that fair school funding will actually be fully funded. We're in those talks right now, so I can't really say what's going to come out at the end of all of this. I'm not sure. I mean, I've literally been there for 2 months, so I'm not on education and I'm not in leadership. Those are where those talks are currently, but this week we're actually having meetings in the broader caucus for how we're going to fund schools. So not that hasn't been discussed already, but I will get a better sense that starting this week, how much we are going to fully fund schools. But to your point, are we going to blow it all up? I'm not sure yet. I don't have that answer. I mean, yes. Do I recommend that we start all over? Yes. I just don't know if we're going to do that or not. I mean, could I propose it? I could. I'm not on education, so they're probably not going to listen to me. That would be like a teacher coming over to my healthcare committee and suggesting, that we totally reform healthcare with something. They would say, sure, that's a great idea, Kelly. We'll take that into consideration, and then I would probably never be heard from again. So that's kind of how it works, right? Things go to the respective committees. Now I can bring your recommendation. My job as your representative is to bring your advice to Columbus to those respective committees. So any ideas, I'm happy to take back. But those folks in those committees are the experts, and I can tell you that this is a very conservative legislature as compared to your past several in Ohio. So I'm encouraged by that, and I do have some faith that they will address these things. But fair school funding is the current solution to the 1997 unconstitutionality of school funding. A lot of people didn't know that. Were you aware of that Fair School Funding Act passed? I know most people were not. And again, I'm kind of learning all this, as we go. But that was the solution. It did seem to be everyone was amenable to it over the past 5 years until now, until the property tax situation, which the property tax situation got here because of unvoted millage and the increase in inflation that you're seeing in the homes. So 30% increase in valuations, increased demand for housing, decreased supply for housing, Airbnbs, etc. So the current property tax structure has always been there, right? It just wasn't a problem until now, theoretically. When I say, I mean, you may have thought it was a problem, right? A lot of people thought it was a problem, but there wasn't the public outrage that we're currently seeing, because the bills weren't what we're seeing, right, until the 30% increase in valuations. So now we have lots of options, and we have 25 House bills that propose to address it, and everybody's solution looks a little differently. And I'm sure the folks today, will have solutions also. And I see a gentleman back there from Citizens for Property Tax Reform. We're working closely with those folks, and I'm certainly hearing from people in my district daily about this. So I can only report back as to the actions that the legislature is taking on this, and right now we're contemplating 25 House bills. So,
Kelly, do you have time for a couple more questions? Two more then. Okay.
Excuse me. Yes, I'm from Bay Village, and we're going to be voting on something that I don't really understand, so I wanted to ask you while I have a chance. So our property taxes, they say, well, it's for permanent
improvement,
Yeah.
permanent improvement levy, or?
Your property, is that what it is?
It's a permanent improvement levy. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is. And, basically it says we're paying 2.9 million per year. And if we pass this, we won't be paying, have any increases in the taxes. So I don't know if that's true. It's kind of taken away our, being able to vote on tax levies, it sounds, for one thing, in the future.
I would probably call your local school board and ask them exactly, I mean, if they say there's no increase, there probably isn't an increase, but yeah, I would have to look at the budget and specifically for you to see, because they are very tricky. Sometimes they say not, and then there is a little bit, and sometimes not. So I would have to look at your.
Basically, the first sentence in here is it's true, your property taxes will not increase.
Yeah, permanent improvement levies, to my knowledge, are very permanent, and that you'll never have to do a renewal again. They can be different, and it's absolutely a question for the committee that's putting this advertisement out. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would actually ask your local school board. They'll be able to tell you.
I was curious, I didn't see anything in your pie charts or lists on NOACA. Okay.
Yeah, we do not fund NOACA from the state general revenue
They're
fund.
taking a piece of the transportation pies, aren't they?
I was told that they do not get state money, but I can get that answer for you. I was just told that this week. There's no appropriation for, now they may be getting grants that they're applying for, but we're just not handing them money. They would have to go through a process. There's not a line item, state appropriation for that. Marty, would you, yeah. We have a NOACA board member here.
NOACA is federal money, but there is some state involvement in it.
They probably administrate the federal funding that comes in.
They administrate the federal funding, but sometimes it's done through some of the state agencies, like EPA is one of them.
Right, so ODOT probably administrates the federal funding dollars that come into a fund, and then they decide where it goes. So that's not coming from your Ohio tax.
It's roughly $50 million a year that NOACA manages, roughly, is rough numbers. That's for roads, bridges, and highways, and it's mostly on fuel tax.
Okay, Kelly, I have one, inquiring minds want to know what your thoughts are on the Trump situation where he wants to have school choices. How will that affect our budget?
So what do you mean? We already have school choice in Ohio with universal voucher programs. Or are we talking about something different than that?
You know, I don't think so. I think that's really it, and I hadn't considered that. So,
Okay, yeah, we have one bill.
So it's for states that don't have that today.
Okay, yeah, and that's going to be, well, I guess he could technically do an executive order, but each state individually tries to pass universal school choice. Some are successful, some are not. We were successful here under the leadership of the current Speaker of the House, Matt Huffman. That has been his project since he had entered the legislature, and he has worked toward voucher programs. That is a very hot topic in the communities. But to give you kind of some perspective on that amount of funding, so about 15 billion goes to education of your state dollars. About 1 billion of that's from the lottery, and about 1 billion of that goes to voucher programs. So that is a very small portion. People like to kind of blow that up and say that you're spending $1 billion on vouchers and school choice. You should not be doing that. It should all be going to public schools. But they're getting 14 billion of the 15 billion. So that's not a significant amount of the overall school funding going to school choice. I can tell you that school choice definitely has increased the quality of education. But I often hear, you're funding billionaires' children to go to private school. Of the $1 billion, far less than 1% of those Ohioans are billionaires, but the vouchers are income based. So if you are actually a billionaire and you're getting a voucher, the maximum amount would be $660. So we're not funding billionaires' children to go to school, any more than $660, and that would be for far less than 1% of the population. So if we took all the money away from billionaires for their children to go to private school, it would be a very, very small dollar amount that would not make any difference in this budget. So hopefully that addressed your school choice question. But I think that context is important, right? Because if you think we're funding billionaires by the billions, that's just not happening. It's just not happening. Because, you know, that's actually a legitimate argument, right? I was genuinely concerned that that's what was happening, and that's how I even obtained this information. I'm like, okay, let's not fund billionaires' children to go to public school. And then, you know, they showed me how many billionaires were actually getting that amount of money. Almost none. So, any other questions?
I think we're good.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.